case for you. I'll tell you all about what I think at the end, but I think that this one is just as tricky as some of the other ones that we've discussed here on my channel, all of which will be in a playlist that you can find. So, this is the case of Michelle O'Connell. When St. Johns County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the St. Augustine, Florida home of Jeremy Banks on September 2nd, 2010, they found his 24-year-old girlfriend, Michelle O'Connell, lying on the floor with a gunshot wound to the head and dozens of prescription painkillers in her pocket. "Please, someone get to my house," Banks had told the 911 operator. "Please send my girlfriend. I think she just shot herself. There's blood everywhere." Deputies find Jeremy, a fellow St. Johns County Sheriff's deputy, crouched at the bathroom door, clutching his phone. The gun was found on Michelle's left side, with the tack light on the firearm switched on. Later, police pictures taken at the scene revealed a shot fired into the carpet. Despite the efforts of the first responders, Michelle was pronounced dead at 11:48 p.m. that night. Outside the house, some deputies and detectives had started to conclude that Michelle's death was a suicide. Some of them were later interviewed as a part of the investigation, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I didn't have any suspicions that it was anything other than suicide. I think that's what we were all kind of discussing, but just making sure we had covered our bases, said St. Johns County Detective Jessica Hines. Why do you need to cover your bases if you're telling the truth? St. Johns County Corporal Mark Shand said, "It appeared to me as if she committed suicide." But in the hours that followed, some fellow deputies took time out to console their coworker and friend, Jeremy Banks. A squad car was used as a makeshift interview room, which is crazy to me, as he was briefly questioned by Jessica Hines in an interview. It was recorded. During this interview, Jeremy said he was sitting outside on his motorcycle, in the garage, when he heard a pop, and he rushed inside. He said, "The bedroom door was locked, and I screamed her name, and then I heard it go off again." When sheriff's deputies notified Michelle's family of her death, her mother, Patty, said, "They just said that she committed suicide. Your daughter killed herself. She committed suicide." The O'Connell family found it really hard to believe that Michelle, a single mom who worked multiple jobs to support her 4-year-old daughter Alexis, would just take her own life. In fact, Michelle had just landed a job at a daycare center, and she had plans for the future. Michelle's siblings were what I could only describe as outraged when they realized that the sheriff's office had only spent just a few hours investigating before they declared it a suicide. Her sister Chrissy said the word suicide was just thrown out right off the bat without any investigation. 2 days after Michelle's death, Dr. Frederick Hoban, who was the medical examiner at the time, officially ruled her death as a suicide. Through various interviews, authorities constructed a timeline of the last few hours of Michelle O'Connell's life. Michelle and Jeremy attended a Paramore concert that September night in 2010 at the St. Augustine's Amphitheater, and Jeremy told detectives that the two of them had argued before, during, and after the show. He said, "We just don't get along. We fight all the time. I mean, it's never bad fighting. We're just Chrissy said. Michelle said that night there's going to be a fight because he doesn't want me to go out after the concert. And Chrissy said, well, then don't even go to the concert, because she knew that Jeremy was, as she described, rageful. And she knew in her heart that something was going to happen. Chrissy said she and Michelle had had lunch earlier that day, and Michelle had talked about looking for a new apartment and breaking up with Jeremy. This was the kind of culmination. I was concerned with all the violence and how the relationship had turned, Chrissy said. But she said her sister had decided to go to the concert because she had already purchased the tickets in advance. She said, in true Michelle fashion, I paid for the tickets. I'm going. I'm breaking up with him. I'm starting my life over. And she reassured her sister everything would be fine. Their brother Sean was with them at the concert and said that Jeremy was kind of withdrawn through the show, and he said to him, hey, do you mind scooting over? Because if you're not going to have fun at this concert with my sister, I sure am. Just kind of brave, in my opinion. Chrissy was babysitting Michelle's daughter Alexis that night while they were at the concert, and she said during the concert she started to get text messages from Michelle, and they seemed really strange to me. Now, they were just from Michelle's phone. We have no proof they were from Michelle. But they said, promise me one thing. Lexi will be happy and always have a good life. And Chrissy was like, promise you what? And Michelle's phone responded, no matter what, Lexi will always be safe and loved. Chrissy replied, what's going on? I'm scared. At the end of the concert, Michelle texted her sister, I'll be there soon. But she never showed up to pick up 4-year-old Alexis. Jeremy told detectives that on the way home from the concert, she said to him, I'll have my things out by the weekend. And he responded, wait, are we breaking up? And she said, yeah. And I was like, all right. I raised my voice, she raised her voice, and we argued, but by the time we got to the house, we were fine. Now, according to Jeremy, Michelle was inside the house while he remained outside with 2 of his friends. At one point, she went outside to get a makeup bag from the car and quickly returned back inside. After 10 or 20 minutes, because this guy's relation of the time is so accurate, Jeremy said his friends left, and he was alone in the garage with his motorcycle when he heard the popping sound. Being a cop, he knew exactly what it was, and just instinct, he said, crap, and he ran inside, and he started screaming Michelle's name. The bedroom door was locked, so he yelled her name again. Then he heard the gun go off a second time. He ran into the living room, grabbed the phone, kicked the bedroom door in, and found her laying on the floor. Deborah Maynard, a former St. Johns County Sheriff's deputy, was one of the first to arrive, and she questioned what she was hearing on the scene. She said, immediately, it was almost like they were just taking Jeremy's word for the fact that she shot herself. We were told it was suicide. They automatically said suicide, even though we are trained to say every scene is a homicide proven otherwise. But they did immediately start calling it a suicide. Maynard was unfortunately later fired by the sheriff, reportedly for untruthfulness, but she says it was because the sheriff asked her to lie in another unrelated case, and she refused. Good for her. At a later police interview, Jeremy revealed he had gained access to a report about the investigation. I read it. I know I probably shouldn't have, but I just wanted to know what went down on the other side. Some of the people in the department later admitted to having doubts as to what had happened that night. When I first walked Michelle's pulse or perform life-saving measures, his attorney, McLeod, said, "I don't think his frame of mind was as a deputy at the time. I think his frame of mind was completely shocked and freaked out." Michelle O'Connell's family insists she wasn't looking to take her own life. As I said, she had plans for the future. In her appointment book found in her car, Michelle had signed up for CPR training just 2 days after her death. She also had plans to meet with her friend Mindy Fox the night she died, which I imagine is why she grabbed her makeup bag, but in addition, the pills found in her pocket at the time of her death were all from Jeremy's prescription bottles, and none of these pills were found in her system. They were all accounted for in her pockets. While the sheriff's department and Michelle's family are at odds over how she died, it's pretty undeniable that she was killed with Jeremy's service weapon. When he was asked how he secured his firearms in the house, the attorney said, "Not very well. I think," he said, "the policy was to secure your firearm, which primarily for law enforcement officers mean you either put it in a gun lock or in a secure place higher up so that children and things and other people in the house cannot get to it. However, in practice, like other law enforcement officers, he came in, would take his gun belt off, and he would place it on a chair or place it somewhere else. Not very safe to me." 4 months after Michelle's death, Shore vowed to press her from O'Connell's family, knowing that his department's investigation had fallen short, and he asked the state investigators to take a fresh look at this case. Florida Department of Law Enforcement investigator Rusty Rogers was assigned to Michelle's case. In his investigation, he found 2 women who say they heard screams for help from a woman and 2 gunshots the night that Michelle died. Something that Shore's department had missed. If she was suicidal, if she was killing herself, she's not going to scream for help, her mom said. As to the 2 gunshots, Sheriff Shore says it's not uncommon for some suicide victims to shoot a test round before firing the fatal shot. In addition, Rogers interviewed Jeremy and asked a University of Florida child protection team to interview Michelle's daughter Alexis, who was 5 years old at the time. During her interview, Alexis seemed to indicate she had witnessed some of the hostility between her mother and Jeremy, saying at one point Jeremy was a bad person who fights with her mother. She also said she saw Jeremy hit her mother one time with a belt. She said, "My mommy would say, 'Stop, stop,' but he didn't stop." That's just terrible to me that a child witnessed all this. During his interview with Rogers, Jeremy said, yeah, he put his hands on Michelle, but it was only once, in order to restrain her after she charged at him. In his investigation, Rogers also called in a crime scene reconstructionist with 4 decades of experience. This person performed a field test outside to try to see if Michelle could have shot herself or was shot by someone else, based on where the shell casings landed in his test. The crime scene reconstructionist's conclusion was that her death was a homicide. Following his investigation, Rogers presented his findings to the medical examiner, Dr. Hoban. According to a recording of the interview with Dr. Hoban by a Jacksonville reporter, Hoban came to believe that Michelle Connolly's death was probably a homicide. He then filled out an amended death certificate and listed homicide as the manner of death, but Tricky never actually filed it officially. He said in this interview, and based on this, I would amend the autopsy and change the manner of death from suicide to homicide. And I did that, but just internally. I mean, I didn't send it out. It wasn't filed. It wasn't sent to a suicide. Sheriff Shore and Jeremy Banks pushed back against Rogers' findings. Shore penned a 152-page review of the case, which is mostly a positive assessment of his department. He ridiculed the field test over the fact that it was done in an open field and did not take into account variables at the scene, such as walls, ceiling, furniture, and Michelle O'Connell's extremities. Jeremy Banks filed a lawsuit against the FDLE and Rogers, claiming Rogers detaining him for the purpose of his investigation violated his civil rights. Special prosecutor Brad King, a state attorney from a nearby district, was tasked with investigating this case. In March of 2012, he broke the news to the O'Connell family that his office would not be moving forward with charges. He called them in for a meeting and basically said, "There's just not enough evidence." Chrissy said that her mom was devastated and she felt like it was the second worst day of her life, the first being losing Michelle. In June of 2016, 5.5 years after Michelle's death, her family did something that really surprised me. They had her body exhumed, and they asked Dr. William Anderson, a forensic pathologist and former deputy chief medical examiner for Orange County, Florida, to examine Michelle's original autopsy report and to perform a second autopsy. While he examined the x-rays taken during her original autopsy, he noticed there was another injury to her body. Her jawbone was in 2 pieces, which indicates that there was a fracture. After Sheriff Shore learned of the exhumation, he issued a statement about the family, saying in part, "Molesting Michelle from her place of rest using some freelance type of approach is beyond unconventional. It is reprehensible." Sean O'Connell, Michelle's brother, said even if he doesn't agree with it or whatever, he should in no way, shape, or form ever speak, public release, or whatever to a family using those words ever. It really shows his character. The Aimee, the one that they had performed the new autopsy, said, "We did this completely pro bono to help this family." News of the fracture brought into question the work of Dr. Hoban, the original medical examiner. Jeremy Banks' attorney, Mag McLeod, said, "Hoban had noted the mandibular separation. It's not in his autopsy report, though. It's in his field notes." But Anderson said that the fact that this detail was left out of his report was very disturbing. Because if everything else is carefully described and you leave out a major finding of your report, it's just not good practice. It's pretty significant because Anderson said that this fracture could explain what happened to Michelle the night that she died. The primary concern is, what does the actual evidence show? And this actual evidence was there was a gunshot wound to the mouth that put a hole in the tongue. But it didn't do any damage to the teeth, to the gums, to the floor of the mouth, to the very soft tissue that basically would have been destroyed if there had been enough force from that blast to break her jaw. So the only explanation I can see that's reasonable is that there was another force, a blow to the chin that broke the mandible prior to the time the gunshot wound was inflicted. Anderson said that my findings are that there was a blunt force blow to the chin that rendered her at least some degree impaired, her mental status from the blow, and then that the gun was then in the mouth and discharged, and the blast from the muzzle did not cause the fracture. In other words, that the blow would explain it. The blow to the chin, the gun inside would explain everything, would explain the fracture. most was that she must have been hit really hard, said Jeremy's attorney, adding that there was a problem with that because no medical examiner worth his salt will tell you that an intraoral gunshot wound such as this, with a high-powered weapon, more often than not you would expect to see mandibular separation. Anderson said it is possible in some cases that, yes, a shot could split the jaw, but he doesn't believe that's the case with Michelle, based on the evidence he reviewed. He said, yes, there was a gunshot wound to the mouth that put a hole in the tongue, but it didn't do any other damage. Not to the soft tissue. I mean, it would have been destroyed if there had been enough force from that blast to break her jaw. Attorney McLeod argued against that, saying that if Michelle had been hit, there would have been bruising, an abrasion, something, but there's nothing. Anderson said he's conducted about 8,000 to 9,000 autopsies in his career, and if you die quickly enough, you will not have bruising. Having gotten the answers that the family was looking for, Michelle's body was returned to her grave, but her death was still an open question for her family. In 2017, the Florida Medical Examiners Commission reprimanded both Hoban and Bullock after determining they had mishandled some of the components of this investigation. Dr. Hoban for keeping case material at his house instead of at the office, and Bullock for showing autopsy photos to non-family members. Why would you do that? Dr. Hoban was also called out for his poor record-keeping and failing to document the jawbone fracture in his autopsy report. In the spring of 2018, a judge found that the FDLE agent Rusty Rogers had probable cause to detain Jeremy for homicide, and that he had dismissed Jeremy's civil lawsuit in Rogers' favor. After Banks' civil suit was dismissed, the O'Connell family pushed then Florida Governor Rick Scott to assign a new special prosecutor to Michelle's case, but he didn't appoint one before his term ended. In a bizarre twist, in January of 2019, police responded to what they called a suspicious death of an amateur sleuth who had been researching Michelle's case on their own. A private citizen was found shot in their St. Augustine condo, which is within the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office jurisdiction, but the department turned the case over to the neighboring Putnam County Sheriff's Office due to the O'Connell case connection. This person's death was classified as homicide, and the investigation remains open. Even now, Michelle's family is determined to keep fighting for her. They have been crusading for a law that would prevent police departments from investigating one of their own. Patty O'Connell says, you can't grieve until you get justice. You have to have your justice, and it never goes away. So, how do I feel about this case? I hate to be really, really cliche and say the boyfriend did it, but I think the boyfriend did it. I mean, his friends had gone. No one was there to back up his story that she had actually been in the house alone when the gun went off. She was supposedly getting ready to go out with another friend. She was breaking up with him. I mean, all signs point to him, in my opinion. Even using your own service weapon. I mean, most law enforcement officers that I know have other weapons that is not deemed their service weapon, or not classified as their service weapon, so why not use one of those? I mean, you could have fabricated it and said it had gone missing or something. I don't know. I think he did it, and I think that he knew he would get away with it because his office would believe him and they wouldn't investigate him. So, in my opinion, I definitely classify this one as murder. The fractured jaw thing, I mean, I feel like, how did it put a hole in her tongue and not mess with her teeth or her gums or anything like that? That just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know. I'm like, in my head, I'm trying to picture if you put it in her shoot to not mess with her teeth or her mandibular, truthfully. Mandible. I work in the medical field, just don't ask me to prove it. I don't know, it's just too many dots don't line up for this one to be suicide to me. She had plans for the future, she had just landed a good job, she was taking care of her daughter. That to me doesn't speak volumes about suicide. Not to say that people who have committed suicide have not ever had plans for the future, but I don't know. The suspicious text from her phone while at that concert. I think Jeremy very could have easily stolen her phone out of her pocket. They were at a concert, she was dancing, you know. I don't know. Too much of it just really doesn't add up to me. This also reminded me of another case. I'll have to look it up and see if I can find it. Pretty very similar. A couple was arguing, but they had gone to Walmart, like in the middle of the night for like diapers or something. That's why I know it was a separate case. Can't remember the name off the top of my head, but very similar. Police officer, service weapon, he calls 911. I'll see if I can find it and report to you guys about it soon. If you know what it is, definitely link it or give me it in the description in the comments down below. I promise all my thoughts are together, really. I will see you guys next week for another true crime video. Thank you for watching. I will see you very, very soon.